like drawing cards, finding more resources, the exact win condition you need, just more tools at your repertoire as a planeswalker? In today's video, I wanted to go over a post that talks about how a play group didn't understand the importance of drawing spells. They were upset at the fact that they had to discard down to it. And I wanted to go over this as a framework to understand why it's important to draw cards, why it's important to draw cards in different ways, and the context to which you can manipulate the draw in your favor. While your opponent looks to stop you with different effects, you can use Magic's different rule sets to then learn different advantages that can apply to all parts of Magic beyond just drawing cards. Am I right in my strong belief that, given the chance, you should always draw? And if so, how do I explain it to some of my friends? Now, this is a deep concept, and there's a whole bunch of "it depends" that's strewn all over the place. So what I'm hoping to do is break this down and provide scenarios where, yes, in a vacuum, in this scenario, you want to draw a card, and then start applying markers here and there and provide a level of understanding. This may not be exactly for OP's friend group, but provide some understanding as to when you should draw, because yes, most of the time I generally agree you should be drawing cards, but there are caveats because Magic gives you plenty of opportunities to choose when to draw, how to draw, and in what context to draw. So we're going to kind of walk through that all, and we're going to start with this text of, so I play with a group of friends with varying experience playing and skill level. I don't consider myself to be a good player of said group. I make a crap ton of mistakes, but I'm one of the most experienced, having played for around 15 years, 4 years of Commander, which is most of any of our group has played. I've had this discussion a lot of times with some of my friends that just refuse to draw because they'll have more than 7 cards in hand on end step and have to discard. I keep saying that drawing is always good. You then just choose the best 7 that is amazing, and they just say they don't like overdrawing because discarding makes it useless. Am I right on my assumption? And if so, how do I explain to them properly that drawing is amazing? And generally speaking, where this is broken down from is a lack of good value understanding, like just a good value calculation. And this is an understanding that comes from experience in a game. And what this shows you is ultimately what is valuable at that time is a heuristic that isn't common knowledge to all Magic players. What is good in that context, what is valuable to you in that context based on what your opponent can play, and kind of weighing that out with what your win condition is. For example, I might have a removal spell in my hand that in the general context is good, but I'm up against control that is likely just trying to resolve a planeswalker and get out value from there. My singular Fatal Push is probably not going to have that level of value. So it is valuable for me to draw cards, and if I'm over 7, maybe draw into a counter spell to which I could kind of replace my removal spell alongside my other valuable spells. So these are like general heuristics. So let's go over specific examples with that in mind to talk about what it's like to draw cards in the game of Magic the Gathering. Firstly, we have what I would consider an age-old discussion of the most powerful card in Magic's history. The discussion usually lands between Black Lotus and Ancestral Recall. I personally am on the side of Ancestral Recall because Black Lotus and Ancestral represent two sides of potentiality. Black Lotus is potentiality with the resources you have. Ancestral Recall is potentiality with the resources you could gain. Ancestral Recall represents any 3 random cards. They could be very good, they could be very bad, they could be somewhere in the middle. It's 3 cards you don't have. It is an amazing top deck in the vintage format, and when it comes to its comparison to Black Lotus restricts you to what you already have access to, whether that be an activated ability, whether that be a card in your hand, and you are also limited to mana of 1 color. So for example, if you go to something like Black Lotus to cast a multicolor spell, you're going to have a very hard time because this adds 3 mana of any 1 color, not, you know, black, white, and green to cast your Abzan spell. You have to add all black, all green, all white. And so there's limitations to all this, which is why I ultimately believe that Ancestral Recall is the more powerful card. But in the context of what we're doing right now, it is correct to cast it because it is just 3 straight cards. It replaces itself and draws you 3 more cards. And even if you have to discard down, you have looked so far into your deck that this is the most powerful rate of any draw spell in Magic at that cost. 1 mana, draw 3 cards has been attempted to be replicated in so many different variations all throughout Magic's history, never to a true replication, but in some ways, in contextually so, better ways. So we could talk about this in comparison to something like Brainstorm. Brainstorm is 1 mana, draw 3 cards. You actually do physically draw 3 cards. You don't look at 3 cards and put any amount in your hand. That's a different variation that you have, but you have to put 2 back on top. And in many ways, this is that circumvention of what the OP is talking about that their friends fear. The whole idea of putting cards away or discarding those cards that they feel like is good. And this is where you come to that true evaluation of what is valuable to you at that time. The common trick in Eternal formats, such as Commander, a little bit less so there, but more so in Legacy and in Vintage, is you brainstorm in the fetch land format to draw 3 cards and put 2 cards that you generally don't want in that moment. And so you're already doing this calculation of, do you need removal? Do you need counter magic? Are you forwarding yourself towards a combo that you are digging for? And those are the cards you're looking for. And then you can play a fetch land and search your deck, shuffling those cards away, minimizing your odds of drawing them again. Now, that doesn't mean that you aren't going to draw those cards again. If you put back 2 lands on top of your graveyard, go to your next draw, you very well could just draw those same lands. The odds are there. It's not 0%, but Brainstorm helps you with those odds and decreases the odds of you drawing them from 100% down to less than 100, which is important. And this is the first calculation that you have of Wizards actually taking design of Ancestral Recall and, of course, bringing it down, trying to replicate its design, but doing so in a way that actually helps many players in such a way where Brainstorm is a powerful Magic card, restricted still in Vintage because it is still just draw 3 cards. You get to look at 3 raw cards. And then in Legacy, unrestricted, fully allowed, not legal in Modern whatsoever. Cards like this represent a very, tall order of what it asks of you in terms of what you need to do. And there's many aspects to it that you can use against your opponent. So for example, if your opponent has a Thoughtseize on you and you have a bunch of powerful cards in your hand that you did not want to discard because you didn't want to draw any cards, what you can then do is you could brainstorm in response to the Thoughtseize, draw 3 cards, and put your 2 most powerful cards that you need in that moment and put them back on top of your deck. And then say, all right, opponent, you now get to look at this less optimal hand, and I get to hide away a bunch of cards from my brainstorm so that you don't get to get them with your duress, with your Thoughtseize, with your unmask, whatever it is. You don't get to take them from me, and I get to draw the next most powerful card and hopefully draw into the next one in some way, shape, or form. That is the power of what Brainstorm can provide, unlike Ancestral Recall, which still, on average, is going to be better because just having 3 raw cards, the resources that you gain, even if you just draw 3 lands, it is still powerful in that sense. Whereas Brainstorm takes that opportunity of drawing 3 raw lands and kind of upsides it by saying, okay, I don't give you the raw resources necessarily, but I give you the looks and I give you the ability to filter them out by putting them away. And hopefully you don't brainstorm lock yourself by having 1 land, brainstorming, and then not finding any lands off the top 3. And now you're not drawing lands for 2 more turns. So brainstorm locking is also a thing which you don't get with the original Ancestral, and getting to show you how now we have that difference. Now, with something like Faithless Looting, you get a further evolution of something like Brainstorm. Whereas Brainstorm is card selection, in a way, it is also just card draw straight up. But Faithless Looting is actually disadvantage in terms of card advantage. You are spending 3 cards to draw 2. It is card selection. So Faithless Looting gets you to draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. So you think it's even, but you have to remember you have to spend the Faithless Looting. You have to use the Faithless Looting out of your hand. So that is 1 card. You discard 2 more cards and you are down 1 card and card disadvantage. But Faithless Looting has that power because now what it says is, yes, you are card disadvantage, but I want to extend the value of your hand. I want to take the cards in your hand that you naturally want in another zone, such as the graveyard, and put them in there for you to abuse. So this is another way where your friends can then understand that, yes, there are situations where I actually just want cards in the graveyard. This is a further expansion of your Magic knowledge that not only is a card good within a certain context, removal versus counterspell versus proactive play, but also is my deck built around a certain combination of cards or certain interactions, such as taking cards from exile or taking cards from the graveyard. And you can play cards like Faithless Looting, where it is card disadvantage. You are not netting on cards, but discarding becomes more natural to you. And this is a great heuristic to help people improve on their ability to remove cards. It includes more cards in their deck, such as Anger and Wonder, you know, creatures you control gain haste if it's in your graveyard, or creatures you control get flying if it's in your graveyard. Cards that have value when you lose them, or cards with flashback that have value in the graveyard. These things are probably some things that OP's friends are maybe lacking in terms of understanding, because if you had more options of these cards, then you would have value in your graveyard. Many colors, honestly, if not all, have some level of reanimation out of their graveyard. And so if you were drawing a bunch of cards and you were worried about cards hitting your graveyard and not having access to them, you could play said reanimation spells. You can play return effects, such as in green. You could play straight reanimation in white or in black. You can find ways to reuse the cards in your graveyard, which is the proposition that Faithless Loot is providing. So again, we have Ancestral that just draws you 3 cards, which is that scenario of having to discard cards. But then you have Brainstorm, which says, I can draw cards, but I'm also teaching people the ability to filter cards away. How do I maximize my 7 so that I can answer this situation best by then drawing those 3 cards? Faithless Looting then takes it a step further and says, how do I now take the cards in my hand and use them to my advantage in a much more sneaky way? How do I put them in a different zone, distract my opponent, and have them answering me in a 2-pronged approach, playing graveyard hate for what I'm putting in there, but then subsequently using resources that now they don't have to answer cards in my hand. And so these are some basics that you get taught from different aspects of card draw. But there are scenarios such as with Orcish Bowmasters or with Shieldred where you don't always want to be drawing cards. And this is a very simple example of this. Orcish Bowmasters is a very common Magic card right now in many Eternal formats, many older formats where it is legal. Shieldred a little bit more so as well, playable in Pioneer, and still has its place when it comes to Standard. Now, very obviously, they will say when your opponent draws a card other than the first card, or in case of Shieldred, when your opponent draws in general, some negative thing happens. Shieldred will deal damage, Orcish Bowmasters will amass an orc and deal 1 damage to anything. And so these are very simple examples of when you wouldn't just want to be drawing multiple cards. And this teaches you a different type of context, that discarding a card isn't always the downside that you think it is. Cards like Faithless Looting teach you that. But when it comes to something like Orcish Bowmasters, it teaches you the idea of potentiality and what people are potentially holding in their opening hand. That you should be drawing cards, but you should be careful if your opponent has answers. If you need to draw a card, maybe your opponent understands that as well, because it's the only card in your hand, you're going to draw 3 cards, and your opponent counters that. Or you're drawing a large mass of cards and you can wait until your turn or wait till your opponent does something and you accidentally throw it into something like an Orcish Bowmasters when you were trying to be quote unquote optimal at their end step, and they can flash in something like this. Orcish Bowmasters and Shieldred, again, represent a very simple understanding of that you can't draw at all times. But as I mentioned, with some of these cards and with some of the options that Magic gives you, you can draw almost at any point based on the cards you have, but you can choose when you can, which is again something that Orcish Bowmasters does teach you, because generally speaking, against these black strategies, they will flash in their Orcish Bowmasters regardless at end step. They do want to use up the mana that they held up, so in response to that, you can then kind of draw your cards. So you can have something like Mishra's Bauble used as a way to draw cards and dodge interactions. So for example, if you have not an Orcish Bowmasters against you, but if you're up against a deck that generally wants to duress or Thoughtseize you, you can then choose when to draw. So for example, a lot of people will play Mishra's Bauble and crack the Mishra's Bauble immediately on their main phase to be able to gain access to a card on their opponent's turn, which is valuable in decks that are, heavy with levels of interaction such as Spell Pierces and counter spells, and also with cards such as Dragon's Rage Channeler, where whenever you cast a non-creature, you can surveil the top card of your deck. And so yes, there's a lot of value in having stuff like that on your main phase. But you don't need to crack the Mishra's Bauble against your Thoughtseize Duress opponent on your turn, because that means you draw the card on your turn, giving your opponent an extra card to look at. Ultimately, if you're a deck that largely plays at sorcery speed, you may not have all the interaction in the world, or this is super early where you may not exactly need to interact with anything, you can choose to activate the Mishra's Bauble on their upkeep so that you can still target them with the Mishra's Bubble and see what they draw, but your draw then goes to your turn where they can't Thoughtseize or Duress you. Again, highlighting another situation where cards like Mishra's Bauble give you options that, you know, different Magic designers are maybe intentionally or non-intentionally giving you the ability to learn with. Yes, generally speaking, you should be drawing cards. There are situations where you shouldn't be drawing cards against certain options. But when it comes to the options you have, instant speed, activations, or whatever, you have different windows to which you can draw cards. So saying that you don't want to draw cards is obviously a lack of understanding. That is something Magic players learn over time. You generally just want to draw more cards. The more cards you have access to, the more spells you have, the more options you have, and then the more abilities you have to play out your mana per turn, whether it be in 1v1 constructed or in Commander. That's a basic understanding. But when you're able to filter that card draw, to optimize what you have with Brainstorm, to be able to discard certain cards and understand when these cards are actually more valuable in your graveyard, or have similar value with flashback in your graveyard as well that you can use later on, and you rather just keep these cards. That's what those cards teach you. But when you have optionality and options like Mishra's Bauble, you can still draw a card and get your value when you need it. But if you don't really need that card on your opponent's turn, you can just choose to draw it back on your turn with Mishra's Bauble, so that again, that Thoughtseize, Duress, that interaction that your opponent might have against you doesn't get maximized based on what you find. And so all these options exist in Magic. And generally speaking, what we're seeing as a common pattern is that players are lacking the understanding of what is important in that moment. And I think a good card that highlights this is actually Nyx Bloom Ancient. I have beef with this card in the sense that it's very polarizing. It's an extremely powerful Magic card, but one that a lot of casuals fall prey to. It is a 7 mana 5/5 with trample. At the end of the day, not a great rate. But when it says if you tap a permanent for mana, it would produce 3 times that much mana instead, then the wheels start turning. Because if you tap a land for mana that generally taps for 1 mana, then you will produce 3 times that mana. A forest that taps for green would tap for 3 green underneath Nyx Bloom Ancient. But it says permanent. So if you were to tap a Gilded Lotus that taps for 3 colored mana, it would produce 9 mana because it is 3 times the amount produced. And so that's when it can start getting really crazy. The thing with Nyx Bloom Ancient is when a card like this, or the other one with Adventure, the enchantment with Adventure, I think I lined it up here. I didn't. Okay. The enchantment with Adventure that triples basic mana, that's also an option. But when it comes to Nyx Bloom Ancient, the ability to untap and triple all your mana is really powerful. The problem is this is the type of card that you include in a commander deck that's already green, that's green heavy, because you need to play this for green, green, green. This is a very demanding cost. You are probably not playing this in 3 color, at most 2, if not mono green. In a deck that already will be playing some amount of 2 mana ramp spells, 4 mana ramp spells, it will get out mana as much as possible. It will play cards that allow you to play multiple lands, tutor up for multiple lands, all that type of stuff. In a color that allows you to already get all the mana you need, why do you need triple the amount of mana? Why does this hand force you into a Nyx Bloom Ancient? You look at one of the more powerful cards in your hand and you get stuck with it because you think about all of the good times that you won with a card like this. Nyx Bloom Ancient is the type of card that gets stuck in a casual's hand that they see in their opener and they say, I'm just going to build towards this with some amount of RAM spells and no hopes past that and a dream. No plan past that. They look at their hand, it's some amount of RAM spells and an Nyx Bloom Ancient, I'm going to get there. And to be fair, that's not a bad, it's not the worst thing in the world, actually. If the game develops to the point where you can resolve a Nyx Bloom Ancient, you've drawn some amount of cards, you've ramped out, you can play a Nyx Bloom Ancient and make a bunch of mana, sure. But the problem is you don't have anything to do with that mana. So if you're playing something like Nyx Bloom Ancient, are you playing X spells where you can take advantage of those X spells? Do you have an X spell in the command zone? Do you have a commander with an activated ability that can take advantage of all that mana? These are the type of things that you have to consider. And so this becomes that whole heuristic of what is valuable to me at that time? What is valuable to me right now? I look around at the table at a commander game and I see I'm up against an aggro commander, I'm up against a go wide commander, and then a mono blue commander that's probably going to counter the crap out of everything, like in a zombie like counter spell combo commander. And so I may not be able to actually sufficiently get to the mana that I need, because it may get countered, I might get rushed down, whatever it is. I may not get there. So if I had to mulligan and put a card away, and I mulligan 2 times, maybe you go past the group tables free, and then you mulligan to regular rules, I have to put a card away. Nyxbloom Ancient might actually be the correct card to put away, instead of putting away that 2 mana ramp spell or that 4 mana ramp spell, in the dream that you might get here, play this, and then do what? Because this card enters and does nothing. If you were to play this on curve and tap out, this card does nothing. So that is another level of heuristic. Like, you have this very powerful card in your hand that you have mulligan to, that you've kept, you've drawn multiple cards, you've not discarded, you've kept this in your hand just in the hopes of playing it, and it gets removed. What do you then do? That is my beef with Nyxbloom Ancient. It is a trap for many players that don't know how to build around a card like this specifically. There are very few decks that can actually use this optimally, and many green decks actually should just be removing it, in all honesty. And it is highlighted by the draw problem of people trying to keep good cards in their hand that are good in a vacuum, but not good contextually. And so this is where I want to highlight this with my Wise Mothman deck. I'm going through this section 2-pronged. Let me know, first of all, a lot of people have actually viewed this deck. I have been meaning to sit down and update this deck. It was last updated 5 months ago. I need to update this deck with more lands. I've been talking about playing 40 plus lands. I'm at 37. I need to hone in on the mill idea of this deck. I have like big value. I have some tutors. Like, I have this as a weird unoptimized bracket 4 deck. Let me know in the comment section down below if you would like to see an optimized version of this deck at bracket 4 and at bracket 3, because I need to update this deck. This is one of my favorite commanders of all time, and I have not sat down and actually updated this deck. I would like it if y'all could get me enough in the comments to see me want to improve it. Otherwise, it's going to take me a lot longer to do it, because I'm having fun with a couple other decks. But get me deck building. The reason I want to go through this is because it's unoptimized. I think this is a good example of a deck that I threw together that has a bunch of ramp spells, a bunch of mana, some ways to make counters, and a lot of mill spells. A lot of unfocused things that are coming together. And I think a lot of average commander decks actually do end up like this, because people see a lot of powerful spells that they can just throw together and actually don't hone in on a specific idea. And so with that, I want to go through some general hands and walk through some different scenarios. So if you had a hand like this, so you had Inspiring Call, Zelix, Mindcrank. This hand is kind of weird. I know that I don't have any ways to put counters on things in this hand. Zelix doesn't have anything. Generally speaking, I might keep this hand. I would probably mulligan this hand, right? Now, this hand is a little bit more interesting. I have a 3 mana play in Ral that can start milling things. I have a good way to fix all of my mana. I have the Yavimaya Cradle. I have a Reflecting Pool. I have a lot of good ways to make mana, but not any ramp whatsoever. I know this deck plays ramp. If I go up here, untagged enchantments, untagged, lands, sorceries. If I go to like the artifacts themselves, I have the Arcane Signet, I have Chromatic Lantern, Commander Sphere, Conduit Worlds allow me to play lands from my graveyard. So if I had some fetches, Dimir Signet, Felwar Stone, I have these ramp spells. I'm not getting any of them. I have a 4 mana commander. I want to be able to play it pretty often. So let me deal another hand. Now, this is a more interesting one. I have Food Chain. I have Food Chain in here, which is a very powerful combo piece with the Wise Mothman and Mist Hollow Griffin and the way I built this deck. I have a protection spell, I have a reanimation spell, but no way to put cards into the graveyard. I have Blood Chief Ascension, but no solid way to mill, and Mindcrank is my mill spell. I would actually mulligan this hand. This is not a good hand whatsoever. And then I have this hand, which is really bad because I have a ramp spell, yes, and I have a Birds of Paradise, but I have no way to cast the Birds of Paradise. I even have a Kodama's Reach, which, yes, would be great, but if this Bruvac was replaced with a green source, this hand would immediately be a slam dunk. It would immediately be a slam dunk because now I'm able to go turn 1 Birds, turn 2 Falwar, turn 2 play a Hedron Crab, drown in Catacomb, play the Falwar, Mesmeric Orb, turn after that Kodama's Reach, play a land drop ramp, and then I'm triggering Hedron Crab and going off. This hand has a solid early game plan and continues to develop from there. It gives me the mana to cast my commander, and I will eventually just be able to draw into other options as I feed my graveyard with Mesmeric Orb to draw maybe some of my reanimation spells, some of my cards that allow me to draw from my graveyard. This is the optimal hand if Bruvac was a land. Otherwise, this is a deal another. This hand is again Dudu Kaka. I have Destiny Spinner as a soft way to protect my combo. This is a food chain deck if it wasn't obvious, but I also don't have a very clear focused plan. This is an example of Nuclear Fallout as a way to get rad counters, but if I'm going infinite and giving rad counters to all my opponents anyway, why would I include Nuclear Fallout and not just another more optimal board wipe like Damnation, or again, just a mono black board wipe? That can remove these things. I can cast Delighted Halfling, but then if the Delighted Halfling and City of Brass are the only lands I have, if I don't draw a land next turn, am I going to Demonic Tutor for a land drop? That seems absolutely insane. We are not playing CDH. That is not a thing we need to be doing. If I'm Demonic Tutoring for a land drop, then Kodama's Reach on turn 3, that's not what I want to be doing. I want a Kodama's Reach on turn 2. That is when things get broken. That is when you start playing Kodama out of the West Tree and you start attacking in and start doing some other stuff. Now, this is another situation where this is actually a pretty good hand. This is a pretty good hand. You have Ral, Troubleshooter, which is early. You have land into Birds of Paradise, Arcane Signet, stock up to help me find another land drop or another middle piece that allows me to get to the Herd of Baloth. This is a situation where a hand like this is actually really powerful. Now, what if we adapt this even further? What if we had this as a mulligan hand? We would put the Herd of Baloth away because all of these cards are really powerful. This allows me to draw into more options. This is a little bit of ramp. I have 2 mana. I have a ramp spell initially. I have a mill spell that starts the mill train going. Herd Baloth is really powerful because once 1/1 counters are put into things, then I can start creating a bunch of tokens, and stock up could help me find a way to make those tokens, or I could eventually cast my commander and then get there. But Herd Baloth is not relevant to me right now. And so it's a situation where our card like this isn't relevant in that situation. And also goes to show you that through multiple hands, I have not optimized this deck well. I have not played this deck enough to optimize it well or practice it. And just through several mulligans, we can see how this deck is unoptimized and how the average commander player is actually running into these situations. And even with 37 lands, I am not finding enough lands. I am also not finding enough of a concerted plan where I'm focused in on my deck. I shouldn't be focused on making counters if half my plan is a combo deck with food chain, but then the other half is milling. I'm doing like 4 things at the same time. I'm like ramping out and going big mana. I'm going combo, I'm going mill, and I'm going counters. A hyper unfocused deck with a lot of cards that don't necessarily work with each other, but are very powerful. And even with a relatively high land count, I'm not able to find a good land count on normal mulligans. A lot of people suffer from the fact that they are in play groups that allow free mulligans. They are not, being held to honest deck building rules and gameplay rules. And so they end up in decks like these that are very hard to, draw, discard, and understand your heuristics too. And you start to see how you desperately need to improve decks like this so that you can be helped to make better decisions and not have to mulligan down so far until you find like a keepable hand. Like this hand, okay. Maybe. This is reasonable. 2 lands, 2 ramp spells, reasonable. This hand right here? No. I can't. No lands. Look at this, folks. The amount of again, the fact that so many cards in my deck are unfocused, that's the problem. I can't find a concerted plan. And I think that's what's happening with the majority of these draw situations as well, which is what OP is highlighting, where you have players that look at a 7 and they see every card is good. That shouldn't be true, because you should have cards that are very important to you in that scenario, or are important to you towards developing a combo or a synergy between 2 or 3 cards. What's going on with the rest of them in your hand? If you have a synergy between a combo, usually in a competitive sense, that combo is, again, usually 2 cards or maybe 3. So what's going on with the rest of those cards? You should have redundancy in your hand that you're able to get rid of context based. So if you have a card that, for example of 1 land Spy and Pauper, I have to discard a card. I am going to discard, generally speaking, the 5 mana enabler that mills through my deck, the one that destroy the evidence that destroys a land and then mills through because it costs more. I'm not going to remove the Balustrade Spy. But if my opponent has a lot of removal and I have the mana for both, I would probably just remove the Balustrade Spy, because I don't want to rely on that as a win condition. If my opponent generally is going to have the removal, I will play the destroy the evidence so that, I know my opponent doesn't have the creature hate. I will have to just kind of go off from there. And of course, that's a very nuanced situation. If they have the creature hate, then they're going to have the hate for the Dregscape zombie. So my example might not be bad, but it's a very level 1 understanding that you can kind of develop into further heuristics. So overall, I hope that kind of highlighted in a short way the importance of drawing cards, the context to which you can draw cards, and the different ways that Wizards of the Coast has provided you and the design team to draw cards in different ways to help you better understand what is important in your deck, how you can better deck build to find different options, and how those deck building choices can actually lead to better decision making after your draws, in your discards, and everything in between. Overall, it just comes down to better deck building. So there are different ways that you can explain this to your play group, but I hope you've learned something in this video. Let me know if you have in the comment section down below. And honestly, as a bonus feature here, let me know what your favorite draw spell is in Magic the Gathering. Don't let it be anything super obvious. I want to hear your most niche or like not so played favorite draw spell in Magic the Gathering, because Lord knows I need some ideas other than brainstorm, ponder, and preordain and all that stuff. But yeah, overall, I hope y'all enjoyed the Commander video of the week. I promise you I'm not a Commander channel, as many of you comment down below, but I do love me some multiplayer free-for-all.